Hi, and welcome to Binary Personality. You can join the discussion in Slack. You can find the links in the description below. You can like and subscribe if you like that sort of thing. And quick disclaimer, this is not Myers-Briggs. I try to keep my opinions in line with Psychological Types by Carl Jung. If you have any issues with anything that I say regarding psychological types, please find me in Slack. Links in the description below. Thank you. Okay, my objective for this video is just to get into what the function space is, or the function realm, the realm that the function operates for each function. Not function type of person, not function dominant person, nothing like that. Just the space that everyone's functions work in when each function is working, consciously or unconsciously. Just that's their space, their realm. So when you talk about an object or a material that a function is dealing with, each function can only use or manage or deal with something, a certain kind of space. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm just going to cover them, so I've gone too long already. So therefore, for sensation, the function of sensation for everyone, the type of objects that it can operate in is the phenomenal world. For feeling, the action of feeling can only operate with topics and objects of concern in your heart. I'll get to that later. Noumenal world, intuition can only operate in the noumenal world, and direct the action of directing the intellect can only operate in with knowledge and information in your mind. So just going over the quick explanation at the top of each one. I'm going to start with sensing. So just to differentiate the action versus the space and the consumable material, I'm just going to do that for each one. That's all. That's going to be it for this video. For the action of sensing for every person, just the action of sensing that everyone does, my interpretation of Jung is that the action of sensing, not sensing dominant person, not that, just the action of abstract sensing, is directing the use of your five senses. That's the action of sensing in itself. Directing the action of your five senses, like touching or feeling or seeing, seeing with your eyes, or smells with your nose, or tasting flavors and things like that. All of those senses can only perceive and operate with things that are part of the phenomenal world. Objects, you can only touch something that's can be touched. You can only see something that can be seen. You can only taste something that can be tasted, etc., because it's tangibly real. So by the phenomenal world, I mean the tangible universe. This is my interpretation of Jung, as he calls it, things like the collective conscious, the tangible world, or objective reality, or concrete reality, and things like that. Anyways, the phenomenal world, and that's a Kantian term, but I'm using it here because I think it fits perfectly. The only type of material then it goes to follow in the tangible world that your five senses, directing your five senses, can sense, can handle, manage, be directed towards, is objects and experiences of your five senses. So objects and experiences of sight, sound, touch, etc. So that's the action, the space, and the consumable material of directing our five senses. Let's go to intuition then. The action of directing your intuition, directing abstract intuition, so intuition in itself, that everyone does, whether it's, you know, your most differentiated version, whatever, or more inferior, doesn't matter. When you're directing your intuition, I'm saying that the action of intuiting is best represented by the phrase directing guessing sense. So you're not directing your five senses, you're directing your guessing sense. Don't run away yet. I know that's not intuition. I know that's not intuition consciousness. I know that's not dominant intuition. That is only part of the function of intuition. That's the action of intuition. When you say you're intuiting something, when you're actively directing your intuition, you're actively intuiting something, I'm saying that in that Jung's definition of actively intuiting something is best described as, if you're going to say, what's another way for saying I'm intuiting something? The action of actually doing it is directing your guessing sense. Just the action. The space that directing your guessing sense works in is not the phenomenal world. You're not directing your guessing sense at physical objects that are real. The physical objects enter and are sensed and picked up by your senses, and then are perceived in your mind as images or visions, the words that Jung uses, not me. And that accumulation of visions and images and representations of all that's in the physical world, he calls the unconscious, and that's where it gets tricky because he uses that in different ways. There's collective unconscious, there's unconscious, but he also just calls it images and visions of intuition. And I think that the term that best represents what Jung is trying to describe for the function space of intuition is Kant's definition of the noumenal world. So we have the phenomenal world, which your five senses can be directed towards, and the noumenal world, which your guessing sense of intuition can be directed toward. That's not the goal of intuition. The goal is finding possibilities. I know that, but the possibilities are the material that result of directing your guessing sense at the images and visions of the noumenal world. Possibilities are not intuition. They're a result of your active action of intuiting being applied towards the noumenal world. The result is possibilities, perception of a possibility, and finding them, things like that. And it's not only possibilities. Results of intuition are not only possibilities. The intuitive type, as Jung says, the greatest possibilities is their goal, but that's not all that intuition can do, according to Jung. Possibilities, I mean, and how you interpret what even that word means. I mean, a scenario is a type of possibility. He says where things come from, where things are going. It's alternative scenarios of every single thing that you sense, every single sensation has alternative scenarios. And yeah, I guess possibilities is a good word that kind of sums that up. Whatever. The consumable material of the space of the noumenal world is objects and experiences of imagination. The images and visions that you experience in the noumenal world, you experience them, and it's going to be very hard for a sensing type to imagine this, but for a more intuitive type, you will understand the noumenal world of images and visions, the alternative scenarios, and the worlds that are within worlds and alternative worlds that you live in and exist in, with your intuition directing your guessing sense at everything that's there. Those experiences, which no one can see, are experiences, and those objects that you have there are all those images and visions, all that your action of directing your guessing sense, you're directing your or in directing intuition, intuiting, the action of intuiting towards. The material that becomes consumed is those objects and those experiences in your imagination, basically. The noumenal world. So the space for intuition is the noumenal world. Let's go to thinking. The action, when you say, I'm thinking, or you're directing thinking, when Jung says you're directing thinking, the action of thinking, he means you're directing the use of your intellect. The things that your intellect can manage, can use, can direct, be directed at, is only information that enters into your mind space. Your intuition, your thinking, cannot manage a physical object unless you have like telekinetic abilities and you can pick them up with thoughts somehow. Great. But when Jung talks about thinking, it's not that special power. Thinking can only access the information that's in your mind, the knowledge and information and ideas, whatever, it's in your mind. So the space that thinking operates is information in the mind. And that information gets there, obviously, from sensation from the beginning, which Jung also talks about. All this stuff comes in from sensation. But also, it can come in from your noumenal world. If you were born without senses, the implication of that, and I think Jung would agree with me, is that you would still be able to have information to think about, but the information would come from somewhere else. He calls it collective unconscious, or it would come from just your unconscious, and different things that are there. The noumenal world that your intuition actually has access to, and passed from your intuition into thinking. So anyways, once it gets to thinking, it doesn't matter where it comes from. It arrives into your mind space as just information. Just information. You don't have a ball in your head. You don't have an apple in your mind. What you have is the size of the apple, the shape of it, the flavor, kind of, and not even flavor. It's just the recorded information of what that flavor is. It's all black and white. I mean, the color represented as a word, red, and all things that all kinds of categories that are in your mind. That information floats in as categories and gets put in different categorical boxes and things like that. It's all just information by the time it reaches your space of your intellect. And the consumed material of your intellect, of directing the intellect, is packaged information or mental data, just what I said, coming from intuition or sensing, and intuiting or sensing, and it all gets formed into data that your intellect uses and forms ideas with and forms thinking materials, which I'll get into later, what materials of each one are. Last, feeling. The action of feeling, when you say I'm feeling something, comes from the question, how do you feel? In its simplest form, the Jungian feeling action is answering a question, how do you feel? And when you go into trying to understand it all, and it's only a few pages into feeling, and then there's a few pages in the definition section, and then there's books on feeling that he's written, that you come to, I'm going to give you this interpretation. It's just my best interpretation from all of this information. So take it with a grain of salt and find your own, and please tell me what the better one was. But you will start to see that feeling gets parsed down into two fundamental, it's like a grid where you have the bottom here being your conscience and a representation of how ethically good or bad something is, versus the up and down of your preference of, well, in essence, Jung says it's accepting or rejecting, but that is based on those two, what's called the y and x axis. The axis here being your conscience, and whether it's ethically good or bad, and then your preference, which is whether it's pleasing or pleasant or unpleasant in this area, and then it arrives as a dot on that grid somewhere. And I call that directing assessment of preference and conscience, just directing assessment. Jung says rejecting or accepting. But you're directing assessment, and it's going to be helpful if you can think of the action as directing assessment. We're not talking about feeling types. Again, I can't say that enough. We're not talking about feeling types. We're talking about feeling in itself. Abstract feeling, as Jung calls it, directing the feeling action. The space then, this took me so long to finalize this, so long to put all this information into a final image of, and feeling took the hardest. Feeling was the last one. I spent so many months, just so many hours just on feeling and what the space of feeling is, because there's so much. Oh, I could tell you the brainstorming that I did, crossing things off the list and finding where everything comes from. And I found that the space of feeling, I'm so happy with this, is just your heart. And like no other function, feeling can assess what's in your heart, not what's in your mind. Feeling doesn't see information. It can't perceive it. It can't handle information like thinking can. Thinking sees the shape of something, the size, 200 kilograms, 500 meters, and compare sizes and things like that. It has information. But feeling doesn't manage information. It manages your heart, and topics and issues come into your heart. Topics and issues for assessment, because anything that's assessed is an object of assessment by necessity. Anything that you're going to assess and give a preference to, or put it on a grid of preference and conscious, anything like that is an issue or a topic that's on your heart, an important topic or issue. And objects don't come in your heart. You can't put an apple in your heart. Apple becomes an issue topic, and that gets put in your heart in a place on the grid. So the issues and topics of your persona, society, your conscience, preference, and all those issues and topics are in your heart space. And those become the consumable material that feeling can direct. The action of feeling can direct. Topics and issues of concern, subject matter that's on the table, awaiting your judgment. Feeling also, it can't, I have to say, like no other function, feeling is responsible for your persona. Yes, it's tied to sensation and how you represent yourself to the world and all that. Yes. But the fundamental point on which your persona is built is managed by your feeling function. Society, social cues and style and all those things come into play with feeling like no other function. Thinkers only try to grasp at this stuff intellectually, reading books on how to be charismatic or things like that, and get the information in your mind so you can try to act that way or whatever. Thinking can get the information, try to, come up with good strategies to be more charismatic, whatever. But the grades and levels of what is charisma and all of that is evaluated by the feeling function like no other function. It is responsible for that, for persona, for how you interact with people and with people. This is very different than David Powers and Objective Personality, who says who claims that thinking and feeling, um, um, the introverted and the extroverted space have to do with whether it's what does he say, tribe, individual or tribe, self or tribe. But for Jung, tribe is and self doesn't have to do with the judging functions. Your tribe and how you interact with the tribe is all rooted in feeling, the action of feeling and the cues of feeling. After you read the definitions of feeling and psychological types, you will see that over and over again. It's very different from David Powers. So the consumable material for feeling is topics and issues of concern and subject matter on the table awaiting your action of feeling, which is the assessment of those topics. I think I've covered all of them. Feeling, thinking, and intuition. So that covers the action of each function, which is here, directing the five senses to which can only interpret things in the phenomenal world, versus directing your guessing sense, which can only um, interpret things in the noumenal world, to directing your intellect, which can only direct knowledge and information in your mind, to directing assessment, which can only assess topics of and issues of concern which are in your heart. And those are the five spaces.